and welcome to the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Animal Law Academy. My name is Alyssa Crowell, and I'm the Law School Programs Attorney. I'm so happy that you're able to join us today as we look at some legislative updates. Before getting started, just a few housekeeping notes. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, we will get back to you via email. To submit your questions at any time, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us via phone, please submit questions to webinars@aldf.org. Additional resources for this webinar will be available on our website at aldf.org/webinars. Click on today's webinar, and it should take you right to it. We'll also drop the links into the chat box below throughout the presentation, so you can check there as you go. This webinar does offer closed captioning. Closed captioning is automatically turned off for attendees. To enable, please click on the caret icon near the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. To change the font size, click on Subtitle Settings. We recommend keeping your mouse cursor off of the Zoom monitor to prevent the captioning from moving up on the screen. Joining me today is Alicia Prygoski, Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager. Thank you for sharing your time and wisdom with us today, and I will pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I really appreciate it. It is so good to be back for another webinar. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Lobbying for Animals, State and Federal Legislative Update, December 2022. I am Alicia Prygoski. I am a Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. If you are new to the Animal Legal Defense Fund, the mission is to protect the lives and advance the interests of animals through the legal system. My role with the Animal Legal Defense Fund is part of the legislative team. So I cover our federal legislation and then a series of states as well. And then my team covers the entire country. We'll get into that more later and what different legislative affairs managers do. But I'm really excited to share some updates with you. We've had one of these legislative update webinars once every quarter for 2022. And this is, of course, the last one. So I encourage you, if you're curious about what happened earlier this year, our victories, our challenges, successes, all of it, I encourage you to go back and watch those previous legislative update webinars. So anyway, here we go with the last one. All right. And before we dive into the specific legislation, I want to take a second and talk about why we need to lobby for animals. This is so, so important. So the first reason that we need to lobby for animals is to pass laws that protect them. We need stronger laws for animals at every level of government. There are so many different forms of animal cruelty and animal suffering, unfortunately, going on all the time. So we need to push for stronger laws to advance their interests and decrease and eliminate that suffering, and also to elevate their legal status. We all know that animals are sentient beings and they should be treated as such by the legal system, and the laws that we pass should also reflect that. So another reason is to stop laws that harm animals, or to stop legislation that harms animals from passing into law. Just like we work to get animal protection legislation passed, we also work to stop the harmful legislation that is designed to harm animals. We'll talk more about what some of these bills look like and specific bills a little bit later on. But it's absolutely critical to play defense when it comes to legislation, in addition to pushing our animal protection priorities. And finally, to ensure that the best interests of animals are part of the legislative discussion. So you take a look at Congress, or you take a look at any state legislature, and you'll see that on any given day, legislators are working through and thinking about dozens of different issues. There are so many other issues that legislators have to pay attention to that it's really critical we let them know that animal protection is important to us, and that we do this especially as their constituents. Legislators want to know what their constituents care about, and it's our job to make sure they know that we want to see animals being protected and we want to see stronger animal protection laws. We need those laws at all levels of government too. It is so important to work at all levels of government. There are opportunities at each level. They are different, but all of them are important. So the first, of course, is local. And this is going to be your city and county commissions or your councils. It can sometimes be easiest to get laws passed at the local level. And the reason for that is because you're dealing with smaller legislative bodies, not as many people. You look at Congress, there are hundreds of legislators. Your local council might be comprised of anywhere from 5 to 15. And it's also a smaller geographic area. So there aren't going to be as diverse stakeholders. You're not going to get the geographic diversity. You're not going to get the multitude of opinions and influence that you are at the state and the federal level. So this is a great place to start. A lot of really, really wonderful animal protection ideas have started at the local level, and then we've seen that momentum carry them through to the state level and the federal level. So then, of course, we have state legislatures. It's more challenging to get laws passed in state legislatures, but it is still achievable, and it can be really impactful because these laws protect animals across the state. It's definitely worth investing time passing laws at the state level. And as you'll see, this is actually where we do the majority of our legislative work at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And then, of course, we have federal, and that is Congress. It is the hardest to get laws passed at the federal level, just kind of because the same thing that we've been talking about, where when you're dealing with Congress, you're dealing with constituents, interest groups, stakeholders from across the entire country. And so it is just more challenging to get animal protection laws passed. It's more challenging to get them introduced, because you're fighting all of these other important issue areas. But when you get an animal protection law passed at the federal level, it's going to impact animals nationwide. So that is incredibly important. As you can see, it really is important to engage at all of these levels of government. And in order to do that, I want to just walk you through our tool to find your elected officials. The Animal Legal Defense Fund has a great tool on our website to find your elected officials. And if you already know who they are, then it's a great tool to learn more about them. It makes it very easy. So if you just bear with me for 1 second, I am going to switch over. Okay, so this is our website. And this is our Find Your Elected Officials page. You can find this in the resources from this webinar today. We have added that. So as you can see, if you don't know who your elected officials are, you can input your address and your postal code. I just grabbed a house in my neighborhood that I walk by all the time. Then you click Find Your Elected Officials. And so as you can see, because this is my neighborhood, these happen to be my legislators, it gives you your federal legislators right here. So Tim Kaine, Mark Warner are our senators, and then Don Beyer is our representative. And then it also, let me just move this, it also gives you state level. And the cool thing about this is it doesn't just give you your senator and your representative at the state level, it gives you the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and treasurer as well. So again, it's just a wealth of information. And then I want to point out, if you click on more, so you do have all of these channels of getting in touch with them easily accessible right here. But if you click on more, there's a pop out of your legislator. And I really like this because you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it shows you the committee assignments. And this can be really, really great because if we have a bill that we are trying to get passed and it's stuck in a certain committee, if you go on this tool and you see that, ooh, okay, my legislator sits on that committee, then you can have a really influential voice to try to get that bill through committee. So it's always good to just give yourself as much information as you possibly can. I highly recommend that tool. All right, I'm gonna go back to the presentation here. Give me 1 second to get us up to speed. Okay. And here we go. Okay, so let's get into some of the specific legislation. I am going to start at the federal level because this is my area of expertise at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and I do work on a lot of federal bills. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to work our way over to state and then over to local. So right now we are at the end of the 117th Congress. Congress has 2-year terms. after which we start over. So we are at the tail end. We are in the last few weeks of the 117th Congress, and then we're going to start all over again in January and try to get a lot of these bills reintroduced that didn't pass in the 117th. So this slide also, you'll notice that it includes a handful of priority bills, and some of them are bolded. The ones I've bolded are the ones where we've seen action or new ones since our last legislative update in September. So again, with federal legislation, we're not going to see victories at the same speed necessarily as we do at the state level. So instead of listing all of these victories, I bolded the ones that we're still working on. We've seen good progress. We're excited about. There's been some kind of movement, but we're still making our way through. So let's start with big cats. The Big Cat Public Safety Act. I imagine many of you have heard about this one. This one got a lot of publicity a couple years ago when Tiger King was popular, and this is a really great bill. So it would prohibit the private possession of big cats and direct contact with big cat cubs. We have been working on this bill for a long time. We've seen great progress. There is so much interest among members of Congress to pass this bill through, and I think that really just reflects where we are with the general consensus in this country about how we treat animals. The Big Cat Public Safety Act did pass the U.S. House of Representatives earlier this year, which is really exciting, passed by a very wide margin, and we are still working on it. We are hopeful that we can get this bill through the Senate by the end of this Congress. A lot of good progress on the Big Cat Public Safety Act. So next we have the Captive Primate Safety Act. This one is similar to the Big Cat Public Safety Act in that it prohibits the possession and interstate transport of primates. So it's another bill that prohibits keeping wild animals as pets. This is a theme. Wild animals don't do well in situations in captivity where they're being kept in tiny cages in people's homes. That is not an environment where any wild animal can actually thrive. So there are tens of thousands of primates being kept as pets in the United States right now. And it just is not a good situation for them. They are not thriving in these private homes. So the Captive Primate Safety Act is another one that we strongly support. We've supported it this Congress. We will do so next Congress. It received a hearing in the House Natural Resources this past summer, which is really great. It's always great to see these bills get a hearing. It shows that there is interest among members of Congress in moving these bills forward. And then you will see the Animal Welfare Enforcement Improvement Act. So this is a really important bill that would strengthen enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act. The Animal Welfare Act, this is one of the most important federal laws designed to protect animals. It imposes minimum standards of care for animals used for commercial purposes. So that's going to be puppy mills, roadside zoos, animals used in research, that kind of a thing. So all of those entities must comply with a set of regulations concerning food, water, shelter, handling, veterinary care. And they're minimum standards, but it's a really good thing that this law exists. There are some loopholes. And that is one of the downfalls of the Animal Welfare Act, but it's still important. It's still good to have on the books. Unfortunately, our federal laws are only as strong as their enforcement. And unfortunately, we have seen severe under enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act in recent years. So the Animal Welfare Enforcement Improvement Act, it would strengthen enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act by doing some of the following. It would require animal dealers and exhibitors to renew their licenses annually, and that would include a pre-license inspection. So, making sure that things look good before they get their license. It would prohibit the USDA from issuing or renewing a license if a dealer or an exhibitor has been found to have violated any animal welfare law. So again, being really discerning about who we are giving these licenses to. It would also prevent exhibitors whose licenses are suspended from getting a new license under a different name. That is a tactic that we see all the time where someone gets their license revoked or suspended, and then they just go apply for a license under a different name, and they can essentially operate the same business and harm animals. And then it would also authorize citizen suits, which is really exciting. It's something, we already have that with the Endangered Species Act, but this would authorize citizen suits to enforce the Animal Welfare Act. So it would just give us a lot more options in terms of litigation when we see that the USDA is not enforcing this law. So there's a lot included in that act, but it is a really good one, and we are strongly in support. So along those same lines, there's Goldies Act. And Goldies Act, this was named for a golden retriever who died after being neglected in a puppy mill. The specific puppy mill where she was housed, the owner of the operator of that puppy mill amassed almost 200 Animal Welfare Act violations from the USDA. And I just want to pause there because I think that illustrates a really, really serious problem with enforcement. If a facility is allowed to receive almost 200 violations, but it's still in operation, then we really do have to question whether the Animal Welfare Act is actually being effectively enforced. So anyway, one of those violations did pertain to Goldie. She was identified by USDA investigators as being emaciated, in bad condition, in need of immediate care. But instead of confiscating her, unfortunately, they left her there. So when they returned to the property, she had deteriorated to the point where she had to be euthanized. And really, no animal should be left in Goldie's condition when it's so clear that they're in desperate need of help. So to address this problem, Goldies Act would require the USDA to confiscate animals that are clearly suffering from physical or psychological harm as a result of failure to comply with the Animal Welfare Act. So again, we're seeing that theme of Animal Welfare Act enforcement, trying to do what we can to ensure that enforcement is high. Switching gears a little bit to farmed animals. So next we have the Farm System Reform Act. And this bill, it would work to really overhaul our unsustainable, inhumane industrial animal agriculture system. It would do that by placing a moratorium on the largest confined animal feeding operations by 2040. So animals suffer extensively at CAFOs, that's what we call them for short. They're crammed by the thousands into small cages or crates. They're crammed and they're so small, they can barely move their limbs. They live their entire short lives without going outside, without veterinary care, unable to perform any natural behaviors. It is an excruciating way to live out their lives. And then in addition to causing extensive animal suffering, CAFOs also cause extensive problems for our air, our land, our water, so much pollution, and also the communities living nearby, many of which happen to be environmental justice communities. So by prohibiting the creation or expansion of the largest CAFOs, the Farm System Reform Act, it would really help to shift us away from this unsustainable food system. And then I also wanted to mention the Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act. This is another bill, really exciting. It was just introduced by Senator Booker last month. And it's another one that's designed to overhaul this unjust and inhumane industrial animal agriculture industry. So it would do a lot. It's a pretty massive bill. It would do a lot. It would work to improve transparency with regard to the highest risk CAFOs. And it would also restrict certain methods of farmed animal depopulation. It would prohibit slaughter facilities from operating at higher line speeds, improve worker labor standards, close a loophole in current regulations that allows for the slaughter of down animals. There is so much included in this bill. I encourage you to go and check it out yourself because it's very comprehensive and it addresses a lot of the most severe problems that we see in this industry. Also illustrates how much progress we can still make for farmed animals. So we're still talking about federal legislation. I just wanted to mention a few more bills. The thing with federal legislation is that there are dozens and dozens of animal protection bills being introduced. And so we can't possibly talk about all of them in one day, but I did just want to mention a few more to illustrate the point that we're really working on so many different kinds of issue areas. So we have the Humane Cosmetics Act, which prohibits animal testing in cosmetic products, the Safe Line Speeds in COVID-19 Act, which prohibits operating at higher line speeds during the COVID-19 public health emergency. the Puppy Protection Act, which is designed to protect dogs living in puppy mills by imposing certain standards, preventing overbreeding, improving living conditions, things like that. Then we also have the Preventing Future Pandemics Act. This was another one that came about because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it would prohibit the import, export, and sale of live wild animals for human consumption in the United States. Then we have the Traveling Exotic Animal and Public Safety Protection Act. And this one would prohibit the use of animals in circuses and traveling shows. We've seen that trend a lot at the local and state levels, and that's just another one that we are now seeing at the federal level, which is great. Then we also have the Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act. And this one is bolded again because we have an exciting update here. It passed the US House of Representatives in November. So we were thrilled to see that this bill would prohibit the cruel practice of horse soaring. And that's a practice that's used to force horses to walk in a really particular painful way during competitions. And then just one more horse-related bill I wanted to mention, the Horse Transportation Safety Act, which would prohibit the transportation of horses in double-deck trailers. So there's a lot going on at the federal level, which is fantastic. Seeing this many bills, I think, again, it shows that members of Congress and constituents are all really interested in protecting animals. I also wanted to take a minute to just chat about some bills that we oppose. It would be great if we could focus primarily on only bills that protect animals, but the unfortunate reality is that we see bills that hurt animals too. And these happen to be related to farmed animals, these three. And you know, we're seeing a really interesting trend where the industrial animal agriculture industry is trying to shed transparency and accountability and really trying to get around a lot of these regulations designed to ensure that pollution levels are staying in check and that these facilities are not spinning out of control. So the first one is the Exposing Agricultural Trade Suppression Act. That's also known as the EATS Act. And this one would undermine states' ability to enact laws affecting agricultural practices. So in more than a dozen states, voters and legislators have passed laws protecting farm animals from extreme confinement. This is just one of many examples of state level laws that would be affected by this. And so the EATS Act, it could end a state's abilities to pass laws like these. It would do that by preventing localities from imposing standards or conditions on the manufacture of ag products sold in interstate commerce. So it's got that interstate commerce link, which is, you know, why they're able to do this at the federal level. But it's really concerning because this could invalidate literally thousands of state and local laws, including those anti-confinement laws. It's similar to the King Amendment that was in the Farm Bill in 2014 and 2018, if anyone remembers that. And, you know, we fought it then, so we're going to be fighting it as a standalone bill, fighting it if it is also included in the 2023 Farm Bill. Next, I wanted to mention the Livestock Regulatory Protection Act. This has been introduced since our last legislative update webinar. It would exempt livestock facilities from Title V permitting under the Clean Air Act. So why does that matter? What is Title V? Title V is a federal program designed to standardize emissions reporting and the permitting process for major sources of emissions, major sources of pollution. So this is an attempt to get out of Title V. It's an attempt by the industry to really get out of reporting about air pollution caused by their facilities. So, I mean, without these reports, we just don't really have any way of knowing whether CAFOs are actually complying with the Clean Air Act or not. And we, of course, want to make sure that that happens. So it's a really concerning bill. Then another one that was introduced recently, it's a bill that would prohibit the EPA from monitoring methane emissions from livestock. So again, we're just seeing Congress trying to strip power away from the agency and strip that authority away from these agencies and their ability to really ensure that pollution is not going unchecked. All right, and lastly, I just wanted to quickly mention Additional efforts. So at the federal level, it's really hard to get standalone bills passed. It does happen sometimes, and when it does, it's really exciting. But at the federal level, we also look for must-pass pieces of legislation that we can insert language into, like the Farm Bill. We know that the Farm Bill is going to pass every 5 years. Appropriations, the budget's going to pass every year. Things like the Inflation Reduction Act, we knew that was going to pass. And with that one in particular, we're working to, now that it has passed, we're working to ensure that funding from that is not allocated toward biogas. If you're curious about biogas, I suggest checking out the resources for this webinar. It is a really concerning industry that the animal ag industry is using, taking animal waste and essentially profiting off of animal waste. So I won't spend too much time on that now, but I do encourage you to check out the resources to learn more about that. So this is just additional ways that we can make progress at the federal level. We are working on all of these. We're going to continue to work on all of these as well. All right, so now we can talk about state legislation. So like I said earlier, state legislation comprises the majority of our legislative affairs department work, and we are currently operating in several states across the country. So here are some of our ongoing efforts, our priority issues. We're working on these issues in several different states, and we work to get these passed really every session. So an example from Florida, Florida is one of the states I cover. And so you take the first one on this list, the Courtroom Animal Advocate Program bills. That's something we've been working on in Florida since 2019. And though Florida has a new session every year, so we have to start over every single year, it's something that we continue to reintroduce. We reintroduce it because every year it gets a little bit further along the process, and it's a priority, and eventually we will get it done. So this is just a list of some of our priorities, and it also illustrates our ongoing efforts. I've tried to group it into issue areas, again, to illustrate that at the state level, we are also working in several different issue areas. So the first group is kind of what I consider our companion animal bills / animal cruelty bills. The advocate programs, possession ban, retail pet store sales, cross-reporting and coordination between agencies. So, coordination between, say, Child Protective Services and animal control officers when there's a situation of both child and animal abuse. And then we have captive wildlife. So that's animals in circuses, roadside zoos, wildlife trafficking. We also do a lot of work on wildlife in the wild. There are just so many issues that we can't possibly include all of them. And then we have farm animal issues at the state level too. That includes fur sales bans, rodeo bans, care standards for farmed animals like those anti-confinement measures that I mentioned earlier, fighting back against CAFO expansion. That's something that we're seeing at the state level as well. And then of course we do have several bills having to do with animal research and testing that we work on too. So that is our ongoing efforts. Now we get to talk about the really exciting stuff, our victories since September with state legislation. Again, I don't want to go over all of the ones. For those of you who have tuned in before, I don't want to be repetitive. So ones prior to September, please check out our other webinars. So you'll notice that there's a lot of California. We've had so much success in California late summer and early fall. And so part of the reason that we're seeing a lot of California is because it's one of the few states that had a session that extended into the fall. So a lot of other states have shorter sessions where they meet from, say, January to June, or really short sessions where, they could be as short as 60 days. But California's did extend into the fall. And so a lot of these bills were signed into law in September and possibly into October too. So I would be remiss if looking at this slide, I did not give a shout out to my colleague, Jennifer Haig. She covers our legislative work in California, and this is just, it is incredible. It's truly incredible to see how much progress was made for animals in that one state this year. So I want to just run through these. We have the puppy financing bill. This is a consumer protection law that bans online pet retailers from predatory financing for cats and dogs. So in 2019, retail sales ban passed in California, but it didn't extend to online sales. So by prohibiting financing, this law really discourages online sales of animals in California while protecting vulnerable consumers from these predatory lending situations. Then we have the Animal Evacuation Act, and that requires an evacuation plan as a condition of kennel permits. And that's just incredibly important in planning for natural disasters. I mean, we all see what has been happening in California with natural disasters on the increase. And so having that disaster, the emergency plans in place and having an evacuation plan in place is absolutely critical for protecting animals who might otherwise get trapped in a situation like a kennel. Let's see. So then we have the Prohibiting Extraneous Testing Act. That prohibits toxicity testing on dogs and cats for pesticides and chemicals. We have the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act. This is a wildlife corridor and connectivity bill. We love to see these pass. It would require the California Department of Transportation to identify barriers to wildlife movement and then prioritize crossing structures. And that can be bridges, tunnels, really any kind of crossing structure when they build new highways and roads. So it's really good to see that. Then there was the Child Nutrition Act, which incentivizes plant-based meals in schools. The Pet Inclusive Low Income Housing Bill. This works to keep pets with their families by incentivizing the development of pet inclusive low income housing. So really offering an incentive to those landlords, to those housing companies that decide that they are going to be pet inclusive. And then there was a ballot initiative that we opposed. It was a horse racing ballot initiative. Thankfully, it did fail at the ballot box. It would have just opened up a whole new revenue stream for horse racing at sports betting facilities. And it's something that we were concerned about and that we didn't want to see. So thankfully, that did fail. So that is California. Let's move along because we did have some victories in other states this fall as well. There are a few states that are still operating. Some states like New Jersey does have a year-round legislature. So, you are seeing progress on the East Coast of the country as well. So we have New Jersey and the legislation there to prohibit gestation and veal crates in the state. This is an effort that has been in the works for years. And I am so excited to report that we've seen great progress this fall. It's still moving through the legislature, but it did pass out of the Senate Environment Committee earlier this fall. My colleague Brian Hackett was there to testify, and he is working to get this bill across the finish line to help farm animals in New Jersey. It's a really exciting effort there. So then we also had a couple of notable victories in Delaware. Both of these bills passed into law in late October. So the first one is a bill that would award compensatory damages for death or injury of a companion animal as a result of a tortious act. So, that's veterinary care, things like that. You would be able to get those compensatory damages in Delaware. And then the landlord cat declaw ban. So this prohibits a landlord from requiring a tenant to declaw a cat as a condition of entering into or renewing a rent agreement. So that's really a great thing to see there. Cat declawing causes extensive pain to cats, and we were thrilled to see that they did pass that. So then finally, in New York, two bills that have passed the legislature and are waiting to be signed into law by the governor. So they're not quite over the finish line, but we're hopeful for both of these bills, hopeful that they will get there soon. The first is the Puppy Mill Pipeline Bill, and that would prohibit the sale of puppies, kittens, and rabbits in retail stores. If that's enacted, then New York would become the 5th state in the country to prohibit retail sales. That's an exciting trend that we're seeing all over the country at the local and state level, the prohibition on retail sales of cats and dogs. And then New York also has the cosmetics testing ban. And this would prohibit the manufacture or sale of cosmetics tested on animals. So another good bill in New York that we are keeping our eye on and working on. All right. Okay, so that is a recap of what we have seen at the state level. But I also wanted to talk about local legislation because we do engage on local legislation. We do work on local legislation, oftentimes with really incredible advocates who are leading the way. So we've seen a lot of victories this quarter, and we also have some ongoing efforts that I wanted to talk about as well. So just running through our list of victories real quick, Attleboro, Massachusetts, we saw a retail pet store sales ban passed there. And then Alameda County, California, there was a ban on wild cow milking at rodeos. This is a really cruel event in which participants they let a cow loose in an arena and then chase after the cow and try to get milk from that cow. So you can see that this is going to cause the cow extreme stress, but it also creates a potential for injuries. It's just not a good event to be doing. It's very serious, could cause very serious injuries for the cows. So that was prohibited out in California, which is great. And then just jumping back to Massachusetts for a second, exciting news out of Cambridge. The city passed a retail fur sales ban recently, and that's continuing another trend that we're seeing in cities nationwide to prohibit the sale of fur. That was a tremendous effort by advocates in Massachusetts, including my colleague Stephanie Harris. Just thrilled to see that did pass. So then I wanted to mention some ongoing local efforts. The first one in New York City is Rider's Law. Many of you might be familiar with this. So this ordinance in New York City, it would phase out and ban horse-drawn carriages, and it would replace them with horseless electric carriages. So in August, an elderly horse named Ryder collapsed in New York City while being forced to pull a carriage. And he lay helpless on the ground while the carriage driver tried to force him to get back up. And this was something that was caught on video. It went viral all over the internet. So I imagine many watching might have seen that. Unfortunately, Ryder did die on October 17th, but we are working with a coalition of organizations to pass this law and to prevent that type of suffering, which is really inherent to the carriage horse industry. So let's see, then we also have Washington, D.C. We've been working on an animal care omnibus bill in DC. It would do a number of things. There's a retail sales ban included in there, prohibition on cat declawing, penalties for the sexual abuse of animals, banning the possession of dogfighting implements. There's just so many good things in this bill in DC, and we really want to see this pass. It is just a solid, comprehensive bill. So this recently passed out of committee, and it's waiting on a full vote from the council. So we're hopeful that we will see that soon. And then I also wanted to mention the DC Fur Products Prohibition Act. It's a retail fur sales ban in Washington, DC. There's actually a hearing on it on Thursday that we will be testifying at, working hard to try and get that passed in Washington, DC as well. I think if that did pass in the nation's capital, it would send a clear message to other municipalities and states across the country about the cruelty in fur sales and fur farming. I also wanted to mention West Hollywood. We're in the early stages of working to get a bill introduced there that would offer an additional legal route to help animals who are in desperate, immediate need of care by giving them standing in court. It's a lot more complex than that. That's a very high level summary of it. Still very new, but we're hopeful that we will have more exciting updates on this in future webinars. So that's a very broad recap of what we've been working on over the past quarter, our victories, our challenges, what we hope to continue working on in future sessions. I really mean this when I say it. We could not achieve all of these successes without your help, without the help of supporters and constituents. It is absolutely essential. So I just wanted to take a minute to dive into what you can do to help pass this legislation. And the first thing that you can do is reach out to our team. So introducing you to our team really quick here. This is the Animal Legal Defense Fund Legislative Affairs Program. So as you can see, Kim Kelly is the director of our department. She manages our team and makes sure that our work is in line with the mission of ALDF and our broader organizational goals. We also have Kathleen Schatzman, who helps to coordinate interdepartmental interdepartmental collaboration, and she helps keep us on track in so many states where we don't have a strong legislative presence, just making sure that we're not missing any critical bills there. Lindsay Verlig is our fellow, and she helps research and monitor so many bills in a variety of states. Then we have our legislative affairs managers, Jennifer, Stephanie, and Brian. And as you can see, each person covers a specific set of states, and myself. I forgot to mention myself, but each one of us covers a specific set of states. So Jennifer has green states, Stephanie has yellow, Brian has brown, I have red, and then I also have our federal agenda. So I would love it if you just took a minute to see which manager covers your state, because we would love to be in touch with you. We'd love to get you involved in our work. All right. So another consideration for getting involved in legislation is knowing when your state legislature convenes for session. So it is definitely worthwhile to meet with your legislators year-round, to develop relationships with them, to bring up these issues year-round. But it's particularly important to know when they're in session, because that is when they're going to be passing bills. It's when bills are going to get introduced, when they're moving. So just kind of keeping an eye on that is a good thing. You can do that several ways. One of those ways is to just familiarize yourself with your state's your state legislature's website. They're going to have the session schedule up there. Another one I use is Statescape. There are a lot of third-party resources out there that show when all the states are in session. So this one, I pulled this map earlier this fall. I do not think it is the same anymore. I think some states have they are out of session now. But as you can see, it's kind of like what we were talking about, where we're in the fall, we're in the beginning of winter, and not as many states are in session. So if you look at this map in January, it's going to look totally different. But it's just a really important thing to know when your state's in session and what you can do to try and push legislation forward. All right, so let's talk about getting involved. I want to just talk about why it's so important. You know, why do we put in the effort? And the reason for that is that we are their constituents, they work for us, and they want to hear from us. So I really view it as our job to let them know about animal issues. So the first thing I would suggest is getting to know your legislators at all levels of government. If you're not sure who they are, you can use that handy tool that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. Find more information about them there. And really just kind of get to know who they are and what's important to them before you reach out. So then you can also reach out several different ways. Email's great, phone call, or meetings are great as well. So I recommend emails if you're short on time, or if you've never done outreach before and you might be hesitant about having a real-time conversation. It can be a little bit scary if you are new to an issue yourself, and then you don't want to be expected to answer questions about that issue right up front. So emails are great, and they can kind of help you practice before you take that next step and make phone calls. So what I will say is phone calls are more effective than emails. You will generally be talking to legislative staff. You don't have to be an expert to make the phone call. You really don't. They just want to know, is this something my constituents care about? So I just recommend that when you call, be prepared to talk to a legislative staff member, know what your ask is, obviously be polite, and know that it is totally okay if you don't have the answers to everything. You can always say that you'll follow up with them to get them an answer, to follow up with them and see if they've made any progress on their end too. And then finally, we have in-person meetings. Might be in person, might be over Zoom nowadays, but these are great as well. These are a great option, especially the virtual meetings. It's really beneficial because you can meet with your legislators or their staff without traveling to your state capital or Washington, D.C. Really the same principles apply for a meeting that do for a phone call. You just plan to show up prepared, research the issue beforehand, have a clear ask in mind and a purpose for the meeting. Social media is also a great tool for connecting with your elected officials. A lot of elected officials are really active on Facebook and Twitter and all the social media channels. If they're not, they probably have a press team or a communications team who is keeping track of their social media channels. So it's always great, if your legislator, if you want them to vote for a bill or take action on a bill, you can post about that and you can tag them. Their team will see that. Or I like to use social media for thanking legislators. So if they do vote for a bill, if it passes, to give them that credit and let them know that you appreciate that. Tag them with a thank you post. That's something that I do often. You can also submit letters to the editor and op-eds. This is a really good option for your local newspaper. Highly, highly, highly recommend it, especially if if you live in a city, the same city as your elected officials. If there's a way that they might be checking the op-eds for their local paper and see something about animals, that's a great thing. You can also sign up for ALDF action alerts. Our action alerts are really great because we let you know when an action needs to be taken. And then you can send an email with a few clicks. You can personalize it if you want to. It's just a really good way to stay on top of what's going on and where we need support. And then finally, of course, you can reach out to an ALDF Legislative Affairs staff member as well. I also wanted to talk about sphere of influence. So this is yet another way that we can all help animals. Each one of us has a sphere of influence. And so just some of the connections that might be included in yours, do you know any celebrities who might be willing to speak out about animal issues? Do you have anyone with connections to a large corporation in your state? Do you have friends or family in key legislative districts? That might be legislative districts for leadership or for a particular committee chair. Do you know any influential community members who might be willing to send a letter or meet with legislators? What about any organizations who we could team up with on a particular issue? Or, a really important one is, do you have any connections to elected officials themselves? That's something that could prove to be very useful. So I encourage you to just think about this, think about your sphere of influence, and feel free to get in touch if you believe any of your connections could help propel animal protection legislation forward. So I just wanted to conclude by saying it has been a great year for animals. It's been a great quarter for animals. This is in large part thanks to citizen advocates. It really is. So I just hope that we can continue the progress into 2023. And we look forward to our next legislative update. This is some more information about Animal Legal Defense Fund. There's also my contact information if you would like to reach out to me directly. I just can't thank you enough. I really appreciate everyone joining us today and hope that you found this informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. That was really uplifting to see how many animal bills are on the books this year. So we have lots of really great questions. We'll just dive right into that. Excuse me. Someone would like to know, who holds the USDA accountable? Are there any checks and balances for departments like that?
It's a really good question because as we were talking about, lack of enforcement is a challenge that we see. And so there are several mechanisms for that. We see our members of Congress trying to hold the USDA responsible. So they can introduce bills like the Animal Welfare Enforcement Act to really put more requirements on the USDA to ensure that those laws are being enforced. Another thing that members of Congress do is sometimes they'll send letters to the USDA asking them, we haven't seen this information about animals that we need to be seeing to ensure that this law is being enforced. Can you give us this information? That's another really great way that members of Congress can get information. That does work a little bit quicker. Another one is Freedom of Information Act requests. Those can be utilized to try and garner information about enforcement when we do not have access to that. In certain circumstances, organizations like ours can try to bring lawsuits to ensure that these laws are being enforced when agencies are failing to do so. So there are several different mechanisms, and I feel like we need all of them. We need all of them because we can pass the strongest laws possible, but they're just not going to have the effect unless they're actually enforced.
Thank you. Our next question is, what programs do you use to follow legislation? Examples, GovTrack, Legiscan, etc.
Yeah, there are so many of them. There are so many of them. So my favorite is congress.gov. I love using that website. It's really good because it's very easy to track like when hearings and meetings are, and also to just quickly look up bill statuses, where bills are in the process. I would also recommend state legislature websites. That's another thing you can do if you're just interested in a particular state. You can go and sign up for alerts there. That's when I was working previous career, primarily in Michigan. That's what I did just for that select state, so I could zone in right on that state. But yes, then there are ones like Politico Pro, Legiscan, GovTrack, all of those. Everybody has their preference, and all of those are fantastic. Just trying to find a way to keep on top of all of the pieces of legislation that are coming through, especially once we hit January and so many of these states are in session.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how effective is signing petitions?
That can be really effective. So there are several different types of petitions, and so it kind of depends on what that person might mean with the specific question. But if we're talking about like citizen advocacy petitions, I mean, I think that when you get a really strong showing of potentially thousands of people who have signed a petition, that's going to set off alarm bells for whoever the target of that petition is, whether it's Congress, whether it is an agency. That is something that is really effective that you can do. That's something that we also do with our work. Like we'll send letters to agencies, we'll send letters to members of Congress, trying to garner coalition support to try and do that same type of thing, because there is strength in numbers. There really, really is, especially when a lot of those folks might be constituents or might have some special interest or connection to the target of the petition.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what federal bills will ALDF be prioritizing in 2023?
Yeah, so 2023 is going to be interesting. One thing that I can say is, I think a lot of the same themes that we have been working on in 2022, we're gonna work on again. We're gonna see again. So I think that, like for example, enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act, enforcement of the Endangered Species Act, ensuring stronger enforcement. That's something that we will be working on. I mean, it's just so critical. It's so important. It is so related to our mission and what we do to protect animals that is something that is going to have to be a priority. Honestly, a lot of the bills that I mentioned, the federal bills like the Captive Primate Safety Act, Farm System Reform Act, all of those, humane cosmetics, that whole list at the beginning, we will be supportive of those bills again. A lot of those bills get reintroduced Congress after Congress after Congress until they get passed. And so, that's gonna comprise a large chunk of our federal legislative agenda right there. But we'll also be working on things like the budget process, trying to see where we can get animal protection language included in the federal budget process, because we know that's going to pass. The Farm Bill, because that's something that is going to be in development over the course of 2023. And so there is a lot going on. And I would say that it's really driven by the main themes of our legislation and our work. Captive wildlife, farmed animals, companion animals, testing, really a lot of those issues that we went over at the beginning.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, you mentioned that the Animal Legal Defense Fund will be working on some bills that may not have passed this legislative session, but will be trying to get passed again in the next legislative session. And the person is wondering, is it more difficult to get a bill passed if it didn't pass the first time, or is there still a good shot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hate saying this, but I think it kind of depends. I hate when I have to give that as an answer, but I really think it does. It's going to depend. I think more so than how many times it's reintroduced, it's going to depend on the makeup of Congress. Is it an animal friendly Congress or a state legislature, if we're talking about that? Is this a primarily animal friendly legislature, or is it not? Is it a legislature where a lot of the members are more hostile to animals? So we have to take that into consideration. Are we looking at language changes from Congress to Congress? A lot of the bills have had language tweaked over the years because situations change. And so we might need to address slightly different issues within that broader issue that a bill is about. So that's another one. I think that, as long as you keep working on an issue and trying to get a bill passed, it's not really going to matter too much if it was introduced and then it didn't pass. That does not mean that that bill is a failure. It just means that the conditions were not right in that particular Congress or legislature to actually get it passed. So, I mean, really, if we're putting in the effort, if we are doing the outreach to members of Congress or state legislators and really working to get that bill pushed through, that's going to be much more important than the time frame.
Great. And that actually brings us into our next question. Did the midterm elections have any impact on the Animal Legal Defense Fund's legislative work?
Yeah, so that's always something we have to keep in the back of our mind. I think first and foremost, I will note that animal protection is unique because it is bipartisan. We work on a bipartisan issue. We need friends on both sides of the aisle. That is absolutely critical. I think one of the really interesting things about the midterms is, we're looking at a lot of new legislators. We're looking at developing relationships with a lot of new members of Congress, a lot of new state legislators. And so it's going to be up to us to make those connections, to develop those relationships, to see who our new legislators might be, who might be animal champions. So there's a lot of opportunity because there is so much turnover there. And so we're really going to have to go into 2023 looking to make friends and looking to encourage legislators to not only learn about these issues, but encourage them to champion these issues as well.
Great. Well, we are running out of time. So thank you so much, Alicia, for spending time with us today. And thanks to everyone else for joining us and having such a great conversation. Please do take the survey that will pop up. It really does help us in our future planning. You might need to click the blue continue button. I hope everyone has a wonderful week.
Thank you so much. Bye.